Hello, this is Paul Ashley. I'm the CTO of Anonyome Labs, and you're listening to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Gary Parker. Today we have episode 414 for February 3rd, 2025. We got a great interview for you today. We're going to be talking all about decentralized ID and email aliases, and for what our guest today will call a pseudo for pseudonym, and how these things can be used to improve your privacy situation. But before we get into that, a couple quick things. First of all, I finally read through all the listener feedback like I told you I would, and there's some really great ideas in there. So thank you, everybody, for those suggestions. One thing I wanted to bring up here is I got at least one or two comments asking me to cover more non-United States-based stories. And I do look for that. But honestly, being in the United States, like physically, and so where I'm browsing from, that's my IP address, I think a lot of the sources I look at probably tweak their output to be more US focused because they think that's where I'm at. And of course, that is where I'm at. So I think it's possible some of these things are actually not being shown to me. Now, I'm on social media and other places too, so I do see international stories. And I do try to talk about some of those stories where I can. But I'm sure I'm missing some. So here's what I'd like to throw out as an option. And this is true in general, actually. Doesn't have to just be non-US based stories. If you think that there is a story that I may not have seen that would be good for me to cover on the show, that would have broad appeal, that would have some sort of a takeaway that everybody could learn from, let me know. You could either tag me on social media with a link to the story, which honestly some of you already do, and that's great. Or you can shoot me an email. And let's do a new address for this. Why don't you send it to news@firewallsdon'tstopdragons.com if you've got an idea for a story that you think would be good for me to cover. Now, I absolutely cannot promise to cover every story that's sent to me. I already struggle with every news show trying to, pick through the probably 20 or 30 candidate articles that I have flagged to pick maybe 10 of those to do in the show. So I'm already overwhelmed with multiple possibilities, and I try to pick the ones that I think are most interesting or have the most for us to learn from. So I can't promise that I'll cover the story just because you sent it to me, so don't be offended if I don't. However, please do send it, and at least it's something else I can throw in as a candidate to consider. Speaking of the listener survey, one more thing. I'm still waiting to hear back from one winner of my book. I gave away 5 free copies of the book, 4 PDFs and 1 physical copy. And in this case, it turns out the person who won the physical signed copy of my book has not responded to my email saying that they won that book. It was a Proton mail address, so if that might be you, be sure to check your inbox and I guess maybe your spam folder to see if you got that email, and just shoot me a reply so I can send you your book. All right, so let's talk about today's interview. Today I'm going to be talking with Dr. Paul Ashley, who is the CTO of Anonyome Labs. And this is the company that makes the product MySudo. This is a product that I have been using myself for a little while. It's very easy to use. It's got some really great features, which we're going to talk about some today. But we're also going to just talk generally about this notion of decentralized ID and trying to kind of compartmentalize, at least, your online life like you do in real life. Because in the real world, you've got your work life, you've got your home life, you've got your life with your friends, you've got a different kind of life with your family, and you already kind of naturally compartmentalize yourself, your personality, the things, even the information you choose to share, right? And how you act in the real world. You've already got these different avatars, these different personalities or roles. And what MySudo does, and other services like that, is allow you to kind of extend that compartmentalization, that those different personalities, those different roles, into your digital life as well. And that has some issues. There are some things that we need to consider when we do that. And so we're going to talk all about that today. 2 quick things before we get to the interview. There are some background noises. That is absolutely unavoidable in a lot of cases. So be ready for that. And then second, there is a little bit of lingo thrown around here in the interview. We talk about the W3C. That is the World Wide Web Consortium, which is a standards body for internet stuff. And we talk about KYC a few times. We actually, I think, do briefly say what that is. But in case you missed it, it's KYC stands for Know Your Customer. And this is more common with financial stuff today because there could be fraud, there could be money laundering and things like that. Whenever you start dealing with lots of money, your bank and investments in Bitcoin and things like that. A lot of these companies are subject to governmental laws that require them to gather information about you. So that is the know your customer or KYC thing that we talk about in the interview. But that's really it. That's all we need to do for setup. Let's get to our interview with Paul Ashley. Dr. Paul Ashley is the CTO of Anonyme Labs and is focused on revolutionizing online identity protection. Leveraging a PhD in computer science and 3 decades of tech industry experience, Paul is pioneering new technologies to protect digital identities, secure personal data, and maintain autonomy in the digital age. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Kerry, and it's great to be here.
You work for MySudo, which is a product I've used for a while now. But tell me a little bit about what that is. Tell our audience about what MySudo does, and how did you come to be there?
Yeah, okay. So, I'll give you the history. So I've been at Anonyme Labs since we founded back in 2014. But let me give you the history. So there was a bunch of us that came from enterprise security. So I had spent 15 years in IBM working on a whole bunch of enterprise security products. The other people that started the company had worked in companies like Blue Coat and Symantec. And we got together and we said, we want to create a privacy company. This is back in 2014. Even back then, we could see where the privacy was going, and it's much worse now, obviously, with surveillance, of everything.
Did the Snowden thing play into that for you guys? Because that was right around that time.
It was around that time. I don't know if it played into the starting of the company, but there was a lot of talk in this topic, about surveillance. In that case, it was whether it's government surveillance or even probably worse is like commercial corporate surveillance is what we all suffer from. But if you think about, we came from this enterprise security background. We wanted to do privacy. And so one of the areas that we'd all worked in is this idea of proxies, right? And so, a proxy in enterprise security is often things like a web proxy. So I've got a company. I want to allow my users to go out to the internet. I actually push their traffic out through a proxy so I can give them some protection of what they're hitting and what might be coming back. And that's the typical proxy technology. We actually had a different idea, which is to say, what if we create an identity proxy? So instead of you going out in the raw, out to the internet and doing everything, what about if you had a whole bunch of these proxies, identity proxies that you could take out, which we call personas, which we eventually called pseudos, and that came from the word pseudonym. And so the reason it's called MySudo is because I've got a whole bunch of my pseudos or my personas. And the idea there is instead of you interacting with a stranger or an organization with all your personal data, why don't you use other identity attributes? And I'll give you some examples, like very simply, within MySudo, we provide things like email addresses and phone numbers, browser security, we have virtual credit cards, things like that. Let's just take some examples. If you say, okay, I need to interact with my electrician. I'm at home. I've got electrician. I've got plumbers. I've got carpenters. Just different people who come around to do different work. So one thing I could do is give them my mobile number, my personal email address. But we all know what happens then is it just gets out into the world, and then sometimes they even sell that data on as well. So what the idea is, why don't you create a home pseudo, and then you create an email address, a phone number, maybe a virtual credit card for that, and then use those when interacting with those strangers. They're essentially strangers that you're dealing with. And the big advantage of that too is that it compartmentalizes it. If I want to go back and say, well, who was the electrician I used 12 months ago? I go into my home pseudo to do that. I'll give you another example. So in the last year, I bought a car. I was actually with my daughter, and we were looking for a car. And you got the same problem. When you go rent a car dealers, you say, well, they really want a phone number, they really want an email address, and they want this information. So it's not like I'm trying to hide the fact that I'm Paul. It's just I don't want them to have my mobile phone number and my email address, and I don't want to hand out credit cards and things like that. And so again, you might even in that case create a temporary persona or temporary pseudo, use it for the couple of months you're using while you're looking for a car. When all that's finished, you then you can just delete that pseudo, so all those connection points are gone. And in the car situation, it actually is pretty bad because when you deal with dealers, what they often do is sell your information on, and all of a sudden you're starting to get emails from about insurance, you're getting calls from people. Yeah. So they sell this information on. So this is the idea. And I have a whole bunch. I have actually 9 different pseudos, and I use them for these different circumstances to sort of compartmentalize what I do. Mostly those pseudos are long living, actually. Most of them stay around. Like I have a shopping pseudo that I use across a whole bunch of shopping sites, and it stays around. But there's other occasions where you go, I just need to sell something. I need to create a pseudo for that, sell those items, and then delete that pseudo. So that's kind of the fundamentals, and the pseudo concept or the persona concept is that identity proxy. And so over time, we've said, well, what do you need to fit out that proxy? How do you work with it? Well, we started with mobile apps. Right, and said, well, everybody's using mobile apps. Then we actually went to browser extension because people were saying, well, I want to use my pseudos to form fill. So when I go and create a new account, I'm online, I want to create an account, right? I want to use my pseudo to do that. So we have a browser extension to help you do that. And now we've actually got a desktop application as well. So I can actually access my email, and then over time you'll be able to access your messages and all sorts of other things with that as well. So what we've found is there needs to be different ways that you can access in different circumstances. And you need to be able to use it for all different circumstances. That's why we started with communication. We started with basically giving you a phone number so you can do calling and you can do messaging. We said, well, you need an email address. They're pretty fundamental. But we actually even did things like we do end-to-end encrypted messaging, very much like Signal. So end-to-end encrypted messaging, end-to-end encrypted voice, end-to-end encrypted video, and also group versions of those. We said, why do you want those? Well, they're more for my family and friends so we can chat. So my brother actually, lives about 1,000 miles away from here. And so every weekend we do a video chat over MySudo as well. So that's that one. And then we said, well, we needed actually virtual credit cards, because one of the big problems that people have is you go online to buy something, I want to buy a part for my bike. And then what happens is that credit card information gets stolen at that site, gets sold or whatever. And all of a sudden somebody's just charged everything up against your credit card and you've got to go back to the bank and try to clear that up. So that's why we introduced virtual credit cards. So you can imagine over time what we realized is there's all these different attributes and capabilities you need to fit out these identity proxies. And, that's why we have a MySudo VPN now, et cetera, et cetera. So that's really the history of the company, is to say we want to do identity proxies, but what we need to be able to do is make them usable by normal people in their everyday. And, personally, I probably have 200 to 300 accounts, across the internet. All of them now are using pseudo information, right? It's very rare that I actually don't use pseudo information when I'm creating an account or interacting with people.
So you've mentioned several identifiers, and this has kind of morphed over the years. Like when, I'm old enough that when I was younger, the big thing you were never supposed to give out was your social security number, right? Yeah, or your social insurance number or whatever it is where you live. But because that was unique, it was global, and it followed you for life. Now those things are really our mobile phone numbers, because now that it's easy to port that number to, regardless of what your provider is, people usually keep it for life because they don't want to bother telling everybody, oh, I got a new number, change everything in your contacts. Yeah. Same thing with email addresses. Most of us have one, maybe two. You might have a personal and a work, and some of us like me have lots, but generally speaking, that is also a globally unique identifier that uniquely identifies you. So how has that changed? I mean, certainly as we've gone online, what has been kind of the evolution of these numbers, and what have the marketers been glomming onto? What do they prefer to find the ways to track us around the web?
Yeah, so it's a really good point. So in fact, if I go back to the early 2000s, when I was working for IBM, we actually had a product called IBM Privacy Manager. And you think, well, what did that do? Well, you could set up this privacy policy to say this type of data can go to this type of person and this type of data go to the other type of person. And it would sort of do that access control. It would enforce those rules. But in those days, you're quite correct. What we've said is, well, there's about 10 different types of personal data. It'd be like your home address, your home phone number. It was a social security number. It was just a very limited set. And that it's completely changed now. Now, when we're in a surveillance economy, right, really what the organisation try to do is monitor everything you're doing. But you're quite right. They say if you hand over your personal phone number, and so this is a good reason why you should hand over a pseudo phone number, not a personal. They said that if you can hand over a personal phone number with a single API call, they can get 90 pieces of data on you. Right. And so same with an email address. IP address is the same. What's your IP address? Are you connecting from at home always on the same IP address, or you got VPNs going, things like that. So the circumstances have changed a lot, and there's probably something like 100 different pieces of data they're collecting on you in all different sorts of ways. And so what they're really trying to do is when you go exactly online, they're trying to identify when you create an account who you are, because a lot of those organizations then call back into data brokers and pass them information, and they get information passed back. So they've got more information about you so they can target your ads and all that. So you're quite right. Like the mobile phone number, I think, is number one. Probably if you've got an email address, you've had for 20 years as well. And so this is the idea of the pseudo, is to let's replace those identity elements with new ones and use them, maybe use them permanently or use them temporarily. But when you're dealing with that organization, you're giving a whole bunch of identity attributes that actually don't correlate to anything else. And then you can have, as I said, I have 9 different pseudos and they all got different identity elements and they don't correlate to each other. So in some ways, it's why we're trying to give you that piece of protection.
Some of the things I've seen associated with you are some topics that are kind of more esoteric, and I want to just at least touch on those since I've got you here. And that is this notion of decentralized identity. First of all, what is that
what
mean?
Is it?
And what are the benefits for privacy? And associated with that was something else you called an identity wallet. So give us a little overview of what all that means.
I would say if I was to think about what's the most important privacy technology over the next 10 years, it just might be decentralized identity. So that's a big call, right? And there's a sort of variation on that called self-sovereign identity, but people use the terms a little bit interchangeably. But let's go. Maybe if you bear with me, I'll give you a bit of a history lesson where it came from.
Please, yeah.
If you go back to the 90s and when I first started in the industry, right? When you're on the internet, there was only really one type of what they call identity and access management. It's what they call centralized, and it's still probably the dominant way we access the internet. So centralized means I go onto an account, like just say I'm going to sign up for Uber. I give them, a username, password. I give them a bunch of private data and a sort of a one-to-one relationship between me and that account. And that's what they call the centralized identity and access management. Then in the 2000s, there came a new technology, which we often hear as social login. And people are familiar with it when they see on the webpage and it says, log in with Facebook or log in with Meta, log in with Twitter, log in with Google, all of those. That was what they call federated identity and access management. The idea there is you had an account on one of these big identity providers like Google, like Facebook, and then you would use that to actually access another account. So rather than have a separate username password on this account, I would use my login with Facebook to access that account. And you still see it everywhere. Like every time you go to create a new account, it's like create a username password or do that login with Facebook or Meta or whatever they want to put on there. And so that was the second phase, and that was probably 2000s into the 2010s. And probably now, it goes back about 7 or 8 years ago, there was this new idea to say, well, we need to start a new generation of identity and access management, which we'll call decentralized identity and access management, or people call it decentralized identity. And it's fundamentally different. And the fundamental difference is this idea of having an identity wallet. And in that wallet, that's where you keep all your cryptographic keys, your identifiers. You hear these terms like decentralized identifier or DID. That information and the private keys and the public keys and all that live inside that wallet. And it also has this technology called verifiable credentials. So you can be issued a credential on your wallet and you can present that credential to someone else. Now, that's kind of the theory behind it, and that was the history. But let me give you some practical examples.
Yeah.
If you look in the US at the moment, there's about 20 states have implemented what they call MDL, or mobile driver's license. So mobile driver's license, you look at California, Utah, and a whole bunch of other states. I expect in the US, possibly within 18 months, all 50 states will implement MDL. MDL is a great example of decentralized identity. In the case of MDL, the issuer is the DMV. So Californian DMV is the issuer. You have a wallet, and in the California case, they actually either give you an app, a mobile app, which can be your wallet, or in their case, you can actually use the Apple or Google wallets to store your MDL, your driver's license. And so they will issue into your wallet a driver's license. And then the idea is using that wallet, you can in person, so I get stopped by a police officer, I can present it. I can be at a bar and I can prove that I'm over 21. Or you can present it online. So there's actually 2 different modes, online and offline use of that. But it actually demonstrates some of the characteristics of why. And it's the reason that we got into decentralized identity, because of the privacy characteristics. If you look at something like MDL, it has what they call selective disclosure. If you think about your driver's license, it has something like 20 fields on it. It has, your home address and whether you need to wear glasses and whether you can drive a truck or just a car and what sort of license you have and all those things. And there's usually about 20 fields on a driver's license. Now, when in Salt Lake City, I go to a bar, the first thing they ask me is, I need your driver's license. And you hand it over and you go, now I'm uncomfortable because that person now knows my home address and all those private pieces of information. If you look at what MDL allows you to do, it allows you to present, and I'll have a reader, and you can present your driver's license, but all it will present to them is the photo on the license and say your birth date. So it's only given 2 pieces of information. The idea is you're proving to them that you're over 21, but they don't need to know the other 19 pieces of information. So that's called selective disclosure. And there's even another variation on that called zero knowledge proof, where you can say, I can prove to you I'm over 21, but I'm not even going to give you my birth date, right? Because the birth date in itself, again, is a great identifier. Yep. I can do a search and maybe find out who the person is. But if all I can have to do is show a photo and there's a zero knowledge proof that I'm over 21, then I've satisfied the requirements of the bar, the legal requirements, but I haven't given away personal information. So this is why Anonyme got into decentralized identity, because it has a lot of really good privacy characteristics. So that's the US example as MDL. If we go to Europe, there's a different example, which is what they call the EU Digital Identity Wallet, which in the end of the day is just a decentralized identity wallet. So by 2026, they expect every citizen and every resident within the EU, 450 million people, will have an identity wallet. They call it the EU Digital Identity Wallet. So the expectation is by 2026, every citizen have one, and it'll be a mobile app. And then every country has to be able to issue like a national credential, national ID credential into that wallet. So a person can use it, for example, to go and get their driver's license or to go and get a passport. Again, those will be digital. So you'll have the MDL, the mobile driver's license as the driver's license, but they're expecting you to have within a few years electronic passport. And then all of those cards that you have over time will get replaced with verifiable credentials. So when you get your passport or your driver's license into the wallet, it's what they call a verifiable credential. And it's a technical term and it means something. The reason they call it verifiable credential is when I go to present it, the verifier, the receiver of that, can check digital signatures. They can do all the cryptography to say, actually, this was issued by the Californian DMV and it hasn't been altered and it has all the information that I need. So we're going to see, I would say over the next 5 years, a real shift around the world. Those mobile driver's license, the MDLs, are pretty much worldwide. So Australia, I think, has 12 DMVs, right? And so they're all issuing MDLs. Across US and Canada, there's 69. They're all issuing MDLs. You go across Europe, I think there's something like 45 different DMVs, effectively in every country in the European Union. Then if you go to Asia, Japan, etc., they're all following the same standard. And the idea there is I could get my driver's license, travel into Europe, and I could present it, and they can verify that just as well as they could verify it in Australia. So this is the story of decentralized identity. And the reason why and people call it self-sovereign identity is it's trying to put the control back in the user's hands. So, when you go to a bar and you give over your plastic driver's license and you're giving all that information away, you're kind of exposing yourself. When you've got the ability to go up and say, no, you can only have these 2 fields for my driver's license, the user's got a lot more control. And so in different circumstances, you may be able to use different attributes off that driver's license, but the user decides in the wallet what they want to present. And if the requester requests for too much, you can say no.
How does that work? Like practical, let's say I'm going to a bar, and for whatever reason, the bar wants to know my age, but my exact age, as opposed to whether or not I'm just over 21. Isn't it really their prerogative to say, look, you give me your birthday or you don't come in? I mean, right? I mean,
yeah,
at that point,
I think there's still that decision, and they could, they could be sneaky, and they could, when you go to present it, they can. So what actually happens is they issue a request to your wallet that says present, do a presentation of your credential, and it's called a presentation proof, but it's some subset of that credential. So they can even be sneaky and ask for everything. Mm-hmm. So in your wallet, right, you've got to be cognizant of what the wallet's telling you. So the wallet will say, they've just asked for these 2 fields, or it might tell you they've asked for everything. And then you can say to them, hey, you don't need all that information. I'm happy to give you even my birth date and photo, but that's all you can have. And so they go, okay. And then I'll do another request and you get in the wallet, it's asked for 2 fields, and then you can go accept. So the idea is that gives you the user the control. The user knows what they're handing over at any point. And I guess if they want too much information, maybe you go somewhere else, go to a different bar.
Is this an open standard that is reviewable by experts and something that, IETF or?
Yeah, you're 100% right. It's a very, very good point. So one of the things we've done within Anonyme is we've been involved in probably decentralized identity standards groups for around 5 years now. And there's different ones, right? Because there's what they call the credential exchange protocols, a technical term, but what it means is how do I get from the DMV into my wallet? How do I get from my wallet to the person at the bar? That's what they call the credential exchange protocol for issuing and presenting. And then you've got the different credential types, and there's one called anonymous credentials, which is really about privacy protecting credentials. Another one called W3C credentials. There's MDL that I talked about, mobile driver's license, a different credential type. There's another one called SDJWT. Those credential exchange protocols and those credential formats are defined in standards bodies. So if you go to W3C you'll see a standard around DIDs. You'll see a standards around W3C credentials. If you go to something like IETF, you'll see the SDJWT credential format in a standards group, right? It's standardized there. If you think about there's an OpenID Foundation. They're the people that did all the OpenID Connect for things like login with Facebook. They have a credential exchange protocol called OpenID for verifiable credentials, and it's a standard in there, and it's it gets worked on by a bunch of people over about 2 years, and then it gets published. And so then you can say, what do we do? The reason we're in the standards groups is we need to understand what's happening so we can make sure our software is standards compliant. If it's not standards compliant, there's no point even doing it, because the California's driver's license has to actually be the same as the Italian driver's license. The format, the schemas, all that's being used has to be the same, because otherwise you can't go across country. So, and the signature types, then they've got signatures on them, and you need to know it's using this algorithm and this key length and all those things. Yeah, so it's a very good point, and we put a lot of effort into standards group membership. The other thing that's really important is most of it happens within open source. So if you go to GitHub, there's an organization called the Open Wallet Foundation. And within that Open Wallet Foundation is all of these different libraries. Like there's a library called ACAPI, ACAPY, which is a open source issuer and verifier stack. And there's another one for a wallet. It's called Credo, and you can use that as well. So you imagine within the Open Wallet Foundation, they have all of these GitHub repositories with all this open source, which is also great because it helps with interoperability. Because if you're using some open source as the basis of your product, then you're interoperable with other people. So there's a lot of standards work and a lot of open source work. So we contribute every month to an open source library somewhere. We just contributed to this one called VCX. We just contributed this week to another one called ACAPI. So we're also contributing to those because we want to use the open source, but you also contribute out to the community. And that's probably why it's getting so much uptake, because it's not that hard for an organization to come in and go, I need to verify credentials. Oh, I can get this open source stack, or I can go to a vendor who's got it. So you can see why you're getting a lot of growth in this area.
Well, as we like to say in engineering, the beauty of standards is there's so many to choose from.
There is that. And that's just as true in decentralized identity. There's at least 4 credential types that we've implemented. And who knows, in 3 years, if I came back on here, they might go, well, we're up to 7 credential types now. You're right. You're 100%. It's always the classic rule of standards. There's just so many to choose from.
Are they trying to harmonize them all? Or are they trying to, or is it still going to just be fractured?
Oh, I think no. So what happens is, if you look at the European Union, they have this thing called the Architecture Reference Framework, which defines the credentials that you can use in this EU wallet. And they just define you can only use W3C credentials, or this other one called SDWT, where SD stands for selective disclosure, WWT. So it says you can just use these 2 types. So they're not interested in the other ones. They just want those 2, for example, or they might add MDL to it. So it's probably more a case of, in a different scenario, depending on what you're doing, there will be a credential type which is a nice fit. If you want a really, really private type of credential, there's this one called non-creds or anonymous credentials, where they support selective disclosure and zero knowledge proofs, and they do holder binding, but you don't have to give away who the subject is of the credential and all these things. There's all sorts of technology in that credential type. So in use cases where anonymity is really important, privacy protection, that's a great credential type.
Well, let me bring up one in particular, and that is a real issue today. Is like Florida, Pornhub is pulled out of most of the southern states in the United States because of the free speech versus privacy debate, and because a lot of these states have enacted laws that say you must be over 18, which means you have to prove that you're over 18, and the way most people do that is with some sort of a government issued ID, which means you're giving up your privacy as we do this.
Yeah, exactly.
Have they signed on to be using any of these kind of
Well, they should
threads?
be, and I know exactly what you're talking about there, because if you're in Texas and go to a certain site, it'll say, sorry, in this site you've got to prove that you're over 18 or over 21. So the obvious use case then is to use MDL. MDL, I said, supports the in-person mode. I can turn up with a bar with my phone, but it also allows you to present it online, right? So you can present it to a website. So what you should be able to do then is present, say, just prove that you've got an MDL in your wallet and that it shows that you're over 21. I mean, maybe that's all you need to be able to do. You show, and maybe you can do it with a zero knowledge proof rather than even giving your birth date. So this is why I think this technology is good, because you should be able to prove something without actually identifying yourself. And that's why anonymity is really important. So I think we'll see this happen over the coming years. We'll start to see those sites just saying, present your driver's license, but we're only going to ask you to prove that you're over 21 and nothing else, something like that. And so that's why I think the technology is really great. The thing is that they put a lot of work into these standards groups in terms of how they've defined the credentials, what selective disclosure means, what zero knowledge proof means, and all these things that enable to use them in ways that, in some ways, you have to give out your ID. When you've got a passport, it has to have your name and identifiers in there. But in another case, I'm buying something online. Maybe I don't even need to prove anything. I don't have to give any information about myself. And again, that's why it ties in well with the pseudo concept, because I have a travel pseudo. In my travel pseudo, I'm at a hotel, I'm not booking an airline, I'm booking a rental car, whatever. They have to know it's Paul, right? There's no way that I can get away with it not being Paul. So I've got to give away my identity, but I can still swap out email address, phone number, and all those things, right? So think about decentralized identity in the same way. In some cases, if I've got a digital passport, I just have to give my identity away. Other cases, and maybe that's the other 90%. I don't have to give away my identity. I just have to give some information that they need to be able to communicate with me, and maybe so I can pay something. So that's how we got into decentralized identity, because we saw it's this new privacy technology. It's got to fit under the umbrella of Anonyome Labs. And so we have, an issuer service and a verifier service, and we have a wallet and an SDK and all these things. So you can put all this system together. And we've come at it from a privacy point of view, but it can be used for all sorts of different use cases, those verifiable credentials.
All right, so let's dig into some more of the practical aspects of this. So you mentioned proxies already, and so let's take email relays, for example. And this is the case where with MySudo or simple login or Firefox Relay, some of these other services, Apple private email, you can basically issue an email to someone else that will eventually route to your regular inbox. And if you reply to those things through some magic method, which I'm hoping you'll explain.
I can talk all about this.
It goes back and somehow still masks your original email. So it's a proxy. There's a go between. There's a man in the middle sort of thing, and not a malicious one in this case, but there's something in the middle doing this munging, doing this transmogrifying of your real credentials to this kind of anonymous, or not anonymous one, this pseudonymous one. So how does that work? How does that mechanically work? And then doesn't that also mean, though, that the company doing the relay gets all your email messages?
Yeah, so it's a very good question, and because there are different models in privacy products. In fact, MySudo doesn't use a relay. We actually create an email account. So our idea is use the sudomail.com. You can have 9 different email addresses there, and we actually create a proper email inbox. It goes in there, and we encrypt it on the way in, and then only you can access it, and then you can respond. And it's a bit like our email server is a bit like Proton Mail, where it's a real email account. If you're emailing from one MySudo user to another MySudo user, same as with a Proton Mail to another Proton Mail, it's end-to-end encrypted. But if you go from Proton Mail to Gmail or a Sudo Mail to Gmail, it's in the clear, because it has to be, because there's no universally accepted standard that they'll all implement. So let's talk about relay. So we don't actually implement a relay within MySudo. We just have a real inbox. We're more like the Proton Mail case. But there are a lot of ones, and there's another company called iInvest that has it, and as you're right, Apple has it. So what they do is it's kind of a forwarding mechanism. So they give you an email address, right? And it could be a sort of anonymous one. So the email comes into that. what it does is it changes the headers on it, and then it forwards it through to, say, your Gmail account. And in the Gmail account, you can see where it came from originally, and you can reply to it. And so what happens when you go to reply is it kind of does the mapping in the reverse order. It changes the headers. So when it goes back to the original source, they'll see the external email address and not that internal Gmail or whatever email address. And so the reason we didn't use relays is it's fine if you've got an email come in and you want to reply to it because you know where to go back to. But if I want to send from my Gmail account out to an account, like how does it know which, for example, sudo? So you've sort of got to munge it and you've got to say the user's got to pick which one on the way out. It gets a little bit unuser friendly. It's fine if you're just using it as a spam catcher, right? So I'm using it for my shopping account and I'm just watching those things bounce into my Gmail account, and that's fine. But if you actually want to use it for interactions, and that's why we didn't go for the relay, it's much better to actually have a real email inbox where it's just from you into your sudomail.com email inbox. You asked a question like, can the relay operators see your email? Yes, they can read everything that's going through. They have to be able to get in there and change headers and do things. Everything's in the clear for them. They can watch it on the way in. They can watch it on the way out. So they can see everything. So even though and then I guess it's like, if it ends up in Gmail, they can see everything as well.
Right.
So they can see everything as well. So it's, the relay, there's a bunch of, Apple users obviously with their kind of relay forward, but it's not a bad system, especially for catching spam, but it's not a great real world email system. Like it's not as effective as that, which is why we decided to go for the full email box. We went more for the Proton Mail style, which is have a full email inbox and then you have multiple pseudo accounts and things like that. And that's a relay. But that's a lot of organizations are just relays. They just they'll let you have these email addresses and they'll say, where do you want this email to end up? And they'll end up in Gmail. And they'll try to do that mapping and stuff. And it's imperfect, but it's pretty good, especially if you just want to use it to catch spam. Yeah.
Another technique that I actually personally like, and I have recommended to a lot of people, is buying a domain name. It's like $15 a year. Yep. And then you automatically own every email address at that domain. And so it's fun because I could go into a store and they're like, hey, we'll give you 10% off today if you give me your email address. And, I'm in Macy's department store. It's like, what's your email? It's like, oh, it's Macy's@mycooldomain.com. They're like, really? That's your email? I'm like, yep, that's it. They give you a funny look.
You've got to make them look sort of a bit real, don't you? Like, bob it, whatever. Yeah.
Right. So that is another technique for doing this. And it's, what are the pros and cons of going one way or the other? What do you see as, how do those two techniques compare, either the relay version or owning a domain name and using
and I've done both myself. So I think I've owned something like 5 different domain names, and then you're kind of doing the same thing. All you're really doing is in the DNS system is when you hit that, when you hit that domain name, forward it to this, they have these kind of MX records for your mail and stuff, and it gets forwarded to your email account, wherever it might be. And it might be on that, like if you look at GoDaddy, all those, they also give you email addresses you want, and so you can map a whole bunch of domains into that email inbox, or you can do it can be external one, it doesn't matter. So that's really just another way of kind of giving away a different domain to kind of hiding your privacy, a little bit of a proxy as well. I guess, and there's nothing wrong with those systems, like relays are fine, and I think that system's fine too. And I actually prefer that system, using the domains, because you've got real inboxes there and it's not trying to do the mapping through some third party. But yeah, the reason we didn't do that, and we just have, here's your 9 ones, like here's your travel one, your shopping one, and that is just simplicity for the user. It makes it very simple for the user. I give off this email address. I can see, and I travel quite a bit, and when I'm traveling, it's great having the travel pseudo, because I can just go and see what are all the email addresses, what messages I'm getting. The airline sends me a message that says flight's delayed by an hour. I can see that in my travel pseudo, and I can see the emails when invoices coming in or whatever. So it compartmentalizes it that way. But it's just our technique for doing. We've gone for a way to try to make it really simple for the user. They don't have to manage domains, they don't have to manage relays, things like that. And so we've tried to go for a simple process there.
Now, one of the reasons I also like using the domain is because I found that a lot of sites actually reject registrations. Like if you're trying to set up a new account and you try to give them something at Simple Login or Firefox Relay, if you give it one of these things that are known relay addresses, and in a lot of cases, even phone numbers. If you're giving a phone number it's not really a burner number, but it's a number owned by.
It's a VoIP number. It's a VoIP number,
and it's owned by some of these companies that do this for a living.
And we've got sort of 10 years experience in this area, so So one of the reasons that we have just one domain, sudomail.com, is when we first started using it, you would get a lot of rejections, right? What's this, some temporary new domain? We'll start to get rejections. Over time, now we've got, more than 100,000, or probably got hundreds of thousands of those email accounts out there. Right. What's happened now is over time, the rejection rate has got lower and lower and lower. And in fact, as I said, I've got like 200 to 300 accounts using sudomail.com and actually there's only one that's really stopping me at the moment, which is the Discord server. Discord will not allow me to create an account with a sudomail email address. But it's gone from, say, 5 years ago, maybe there was 10% of would get rejected. I think it's probably less than 1% now, because over time, more and more people have used sudomail.com. And so what there is, and say, well, why does that happen? Well, there's these companies that try to flag bad domains. Right. And so you're someone like Microsoft. Microsoft make a call and say, I'm getting this email coming in from this domain. This is a good one or a bad one. And they'll talk to one of these services and the service will say, yeah, no, that's a bad one. I'd block that. And then Outlook would block it. And that's why you get those problems. But over time, because we've got hundreds and hundreds of thousands of these accounts out there, these email accounts, over time, I've noticed that more and more we're being dropped off those lists. And it's no, Proton Mail has the same problem, right, over time. It gets better and better. The more people you use using the domain, the more you get dropped off those lists. And so as I said, now I think, and I keep going back to Discord maybe every 6 months or 12 months and trying it again to see if we've been dropped off. And I haven't, we're still being blocked, sudomail.com. But it's getting rarer. And so that's the case with email. Now, phone numbers are completely different. The way it gets blocked on the phone number is when you go to enter your phone number into an account, they actually make a call out and said, what type of number is this? Is this a mobile number or this is a VoIP number? And some will go, oh, if it's a VoIP number, I won't accept it. And that's why that happens. But even then, like I found over time, over the last 10 years, the rate of rejection there has even got lower and lower. There's some accounts won't do it. Like if you're using it for 2FA, they say, no, I'm not going to allow it. That's a VoIP, no, we're not going to allow it. And some of the big providers, maybe Meta, Facebook, might not do it. But even that changes over time. So again, like I would say majority of the accounts that I have with phone numbers have a pseudo phone number in there. And same with you give it to your electrician or your dentist. When you go to your dentist, give them your pseudo phone number so that when they're giving you, updates about your appointment, it's going to that rather than to your mobile device. So I would say, again, it's well into the 90s get accepted. And there's just a few accounts where you go, oh, they're not going to, what am I going to do in that case where they're not going to accept it? And I find it's mainly around 2FA, when you're trying to use it as a two-factor authentication.
Well, so I certainly hear the argument that some of these companies will claim that the reason they don't want to accept those numbers is because there's a lot of fraud, and they want to prevent people from coming up with fly-by-night accounts and trying to get up to no good. But maybe I'm just jaded, but I actually think a lot of these people also don't like the fact that you're not giving them a trackable number.
That's right. That's right. I mean, it's a classic situation. Like when you're, as I said, when you hand over your real mobile number, they can do an API call and get 90 pieces of data on you. So, when you're going through Best Buys and you're at the checkout there and they say, oh, sir, we've got this new program. Can you just give me your mobile number, right? They don't. It's not your mobile number they want. They want to do that call out and find out who you are and all those other things. So straight away, I just give them a pseudo number, and it's fine. They can still send me a text message and give me offers and all that, but I'm not giving away that mobile number. Now, when they go and do an API call on that number, they're not going to get any information about me. I don't know what they're going to get, but they're not going to get any information about me. But that's the real reason why they want your mobile number. As I said, like they can get 90, 100 pieces of information on you, just like that with an API call. Probably costs them 2 cents or something.
And you briefly touched on this, but I want to make sure we hit this one. A lot of the social media companies in particular don't like you using pseudonyms. Like they don't want you even having multiple accounts. Like
That's true.
I had 2 LinkedIn accounts. I've actually managed to maintain 2 LinkedIn accounts for a long time, but like they've been trying real hard to figure out those are the same account and try to combine them. Yeah. So isn't it a lot harder to do this with like particular social media accounts?
It is difficult. And what I find is you've like let's say you want to have 2 Twitter or 2 X accounts, right? You've got to have 2 separate accounts is what you've done. And you've got to manage them separately. Like what I find to do that, exactly what you're doing is you've got to do it on different devices, and you've got to have you've got to have a VPN, a different IP address. Because what they're trying to do is they're trying to say, is there LinkedIn accounts or Twitter accounts or whatever accounts that are actually the same person? And you're right, they don't want that to happen, but you can do it. Like if you've got an iPad, that could be one LinkedIn account. You've got your laptop, maybe that's another. You go through VPNs with different, egress points, and what you're trying to do is just keep those separate. It's as soon as you try to use them on the same device and that you might give something away. And so, you're quite right. Just about all the social media accounts frown on having these separate accounts, which I don't find is good, because there's no reason why you shouldn't have a Twitter account that's related to work, and it's all about, in my case, security, privacy, identity, etc. And then I might have a personal one, which is like my sport interests and other types, and they should be separate. They shouldn't be mixed together. And in fact, like, I hate following accounts where one day it's a technical thing and the next day they're telling you,
yes,
I went to this band or whatever.
Yes.
And I hate it when they're mixed up together. And so you should be able to separate them. But for some reason, they still frown on that idea of having these, having different personas or different, it's different roles in your life. Yeah.
Well, again, maybe I just jaded, but I think it's because they want to track you and they want to do the surveillance capitalism thing, and so they want to know all about you, and they don't want you to fracture and fragment your personalities. But you're exactly right. In real life, we have these same personalities too. We've got home, we've got work, we've got friends, we've got family, and we just want to extend that into the online world, but the online world doesn't want that.
Yeah, and that's what I have. Like, so with my family and friends, like, I have a pseudo for that, and I have a handle for that. And so all of my friends and that actually all do end-to-end encrypted messaging with me over MySudo, right? But that's and I've got a phone number for them and all that sort of stuff as well. But that's completely separate for when I'm traveling and I'm using my travel pseudo. It's like it's a different context. Like, they shouldn't be overlapping. They should be separate. And I guess that's the problem of having single identifier. When you got your mobile device and you go, well, I'm using it with my friends, I'm using it with my plumber, and I've just given it to Delta Airlines, and I've just given it to the hotel. It's pretty messy.
Doctor.
It's pretty messy, and so you end up not being able to answer your phone anymore because you're just getting calls from everybody. So whereas I find, like, if I look at my pseudo app during the day, I see all these calls coming in to shopping and travel, and I just ignore them, right? Because I know it's the airline trying to offer this or whatever. I kind of know that, but when it comes to my mobile device, because I'm very careful about who I give it to, I can pretty much answer it during the day because I know it's going to come from a family or friend or someone that's it's kind of important that I answer that.
Everything we've talked about so far is about identifiers that we can at least mostly control. What about things that we don't control, and like advertising IDs? This is something that's invisible to a lot of people, but your phones are giving up all the time, and sometimes your computer and browser, your IP addresses, and then fingerprinting is really insidious. What about all these things we can't control? Doesn't that undermine all of these efforts?
Yeah, no, so you're 100% right. So the first thing is whenever you're accessing, so on my mobile, I have the MySudo VPN on there, right? So I have it on there, and I have it on all the time. On my desktop, I have VPN as well. So I have VPNs going all the time. I'm changing egress points quite regularly. So I think that's to hide the IP address and stop the IP address being trackable. Then you say, okay, well, what about browsing and fingerprinting and things like that, and add tracker blockers and those things? So if you have a look at example in MySudo, we have a browser in there that you can open up per pseudo that has some protections in it to try to stop that fingerprinting and that being able to follow you through the browser. But again, that's not easy. That's not easy to do. It's another avenue. And by advertiser IDs, I think you're meaning like within the Google network and the Apple network, they have these Apple IDs and these Google IDs. Thankfully, now you can actually turn those off. If you go into Apple and have a look at privacy and settings, you can go in the way it's interesting. If you have a look in the settings for the advertiser ID, it says something like, if you turn this on, you will get you much better advertising. If you turn it off, you'll get, undirected advertising. They kind of like make it sound good, but if you turn it off, then they can't use that advertiser ID to kind of track you from your mobile devices. Unfortunately, it is a cat and mouse game, though. It's whatever technology they're using now. In a year, they'll have thought of something else, a different way of tracking you. We all hear about, if I open up my Firefox browser, they'll be looking to see, it's a Firefox browser and you've got these 3 plugins and it's being run on a Mac, so I'll keep that away. And then if I come in another one, they go, well, that's got to be the same user. So there is a bit of a cat and mouse thing here to do. And so that's why, like, we also kind of sell into enterprise customers, and that's why we have a private browser solution, which is like browser extensions and mobile apps and things, to allow sort of enterprise to have a bit more of a private experience. So, and MySudo has, within the MySudo mobile apps, has that as well. Again, so it's multifaceted, and that over time, like you realize that to be private online, it does take some effort because, like, as I said, like if, what's the journey for privacy? So some ways, like if you've been doing nothing, the first thing to work out is where you're at, right? So we have another product called MySudo Reclaim, and all it does is go through your Gmail account, and it pops up and it says, you have these 30 accounts that you're getting email from, and it's just, this is Uber, and this is whatever the different websites and things that you've been signing on to, and then we go through which ones do you still want to keep. And so the idea then, if you want to keep them, we say, well, swap them over to pseudo details. So get your private stuff out of there, swap it over with pseudo details. Or if you want to delete it, you don't use it anymore, which is a really good thing to do, then go and this is the instructions of how to go and delete your account at that provider. So that's kind of a starting point. But there's also, like if I think about my pseudo journey, you start with 1, 2, 3 pseudos and you start to work on it. And over time, you start to work out what you need them for. So I realized over time that I actually have one for sport. So I have 3 children and they play sport and soccer and they go off and play, basketball and do swimming and that. And so I always use the sports pseudos when I have to give it away to the other parents, when I'm, having given it away to coaches or whatever. So you find over time that, like in the pseudo sense or the personas, you work out what the personas are that match the different things you do. And then it just takes time. Over time, I've been through all of my 200 to 300 accounts. And as I go to a new account, if I'm using personal data there, the first thing I do is swap it over for pseudo data and say, let's at least get those out of those accounts. So I'm trying my best, and I can tell you probably for the last 2 or 3 years, I've never created an account where I'm using personal data. I'm always using pseudo data. So I go and and we do it every week or two, we're creating a new account for some reason. So then you try not to use your personal data on those accounts. And it's usually email address, usually phone number, maybe it's a credit card. And then all those 3 cases with MySudo, you can swap them out for other identifiers.
These are things that, like email accounts and phone numbers, things we use basically for life. And so we create these things, and we could have these things for literally decades. And
yes, what
happens when the company that you've been relying on to provide this service either goes out of business or has a major outage? And this is, of course, this is true with any company you might have, but I'm thinking about relay companies or some of these VoIP companies where they're middlemen that I've inserted in this situation where if they're down or they're an outage or go out of business or, maybe get bought out by somebody who's a lot less reputable, somebody they're having hard times. So they sell out. And one of the big things they can sell is people's data, right? They didn't do it before, but times are tough. They got creditors, and they're fire sailing everything. So they give away your data. Is there anything you can do to protect yourself against that situation?
So I guess I can tell you what our experience has been. So on the email side, it's not been an issue for us because we built our own email system. So we don't rely on a third-party email system. So it's really just between us and the cloud provider. If the cloud provider goes down, and they do, even, the big ones, the AWSs and the Googles, they might go down once a year, but you're talking, maybe 4 hours or something like that, and they get them back up and running. So it's not such an issue like at that level. But then, we deal with multiple VoIP providers to get those phone numbers, right? So we do multiple VoIP providers. And you could say, well, what happens if something happens to one of those? For us, it's not an issue because we can swap from one to another, right? We can always give you a new phone number if we need to. But to be honest, even in the last 10 years where we've been doing this, we've never had a problem with any VoIP providers going out of business. They've all been reliable and, respecting data and all those things. So it actually hasn't been a problem for us. But I'm sure if, for example, if one of our VoIP providers, I'll give you a name, Twilio, that we use, and that's just one of them. If they were to change their policy and decide that we're going to surveil every SMS message that goes through or something, then we're probably going to look at changing provider. And for us, it's not a big deal. We've had multiple providers. We know how to do that. So I don't know. It actually has been a big deal, either from just the cloud providers keeping those systems running, all those companies doing bad things. It's actually been a pretty good experience for us. Same with virtual credit cards. So we can't just mint credit cards. Where do we get our credit card numbers? Well, they come from a bank, and we've used multiple banks over the years, and they issue credit card numbers to us, which we then hand over to our users, and then the users can buy things with those credit card numbers, over all those virtual credit card numbers. And even in that case, we haven't had problems with those either. So it hasn't. It's actually, we always have it at the back of our mind as well. What if this bank goes out, or what if this? But To be honest, these days, the systems themselves are fairly reliable. We use cloud providers. They all use different cloud providers and things, but the reliability is very, very high. And it's occasionally, we'll get support tickets. I think even in the last few weeks, we had an outage, and it was some, Amazon region that went out, but you're talking about a few hours and it comes back up and then the service goes again. So it's not a big problem at all. Actually, one point you made before was about people using these services for bad things, right? Because you've got a layer of anonymity. If you go and sign up for MySudo, we don't ask you anything about your identifiers, right? We don't say, go and create an account and give us your phone number and email. You just get a MySudo account and you start generating phone numbers and things like that. But what we've found over time that it's very rare that we actually get problems with people using it in a malicious way. And the way we know that is we'll get, a request from a police force or something about this phone number or something. But it's actually pretty uncommon. And I think the way I think about it is when you go through and get a MySudo account, you're getting it through the App Store or the Play Store. And by doing that, I think in some ways we've sort of insulated ourselves because Apple probably knows who you are. Like we don't know who you are as running the MySudo service, but Apple probably does, or Google does if you're using the Play Store. So we find that the misuse of the service is actually pretty rare. It's pretty rare, and we're guessing it's probably because getting a Play Store account or an App Store account.
All right, so you bring up this notion of what you guys know about people, and you can answer for yourself, but I'm curious if you can generalize as well. But if I'm using some of these services, what kind of privacy level can I expect? How much information could you give to somebody if they issued you a warrant? What would I expect?
So in our case, we've always been very, very privacy sensitive, right? So even when if a police officer comes to us or whatever and says, I've got a warrant, I need this information on a person, we almost have no information. Like we don't even keep IP addresses and things like that. Like we might keep stuff for 48 hours and then it's gone. We don't know, like they'll say, who owns that phone number? We don't know. Who owns that email address? We don't know. There's probably one exception to that, and that is if you use virtual cards. Because of regulation, if you go through the MySudo virtual card system and get a virtual card, we have to do what they say a KYC or, know your customer check. Yeah. So we have to go through that. And that's one case where we do have to go through that process, and we use a third party to do that. But then all we do is store that you've been through that process and a little bit of information. So even then, we're trying not to keep information about you. In fact, we've never even had a request related to a user with a virtual card. So it hasn't been an issue. But in our case, we're very sensitive. And it's like VPNs. Like we have a VPN service we run. If you look at probably 80% of VPN services, they're just surveillance devices. That's what they were built for. The reason why they can be cheap and everything is they're there to surveil the users. So we're, again, different. You can install the MySudo VPN. We don't know who you are. We don't keep any logs about what the traffic is. You just use it. So we're a company that's always come, like it's privacy first. So we're like minimal data that we've got, anything we need to keep. So let's say we need to keep some data for just debugging purposes, whatever. We keep it for as short a time as possible, and everything in the back end is encrypted. So even if somebody was to come in and try to break into the Anonyme systems and get all the MySudo data, everything is just a bunch of encrypted blobs. And who has the keys for those encrypted blobs? Well, the users do. All of the encryption keys are on the phones or on the desktop of the user. They're not. We don't keep any keys for user data. So what normally happens is if an email comes in from, say, Gmail, and that has to be in the clear because it's coming from Gmail, first thing we do is as soon as it enters Anonyme, we encrypt it with the public key of that receiver. All right. So what it means is, so we encrypt it straight away and store it, right? So it's encrypted. We then can't decrypt it because the only way you can decrypt it is your MySudo app pulls it off the server. You've got the private key on there, and then you can decrypt it. So we're very sensitive. So if you're doing MySudo to MySudo, everything's encrypted: email, messaging, video, voice. If you're going to use, say, SMS out to your dentist, that again has to be in the clear because the SMS system's in the clear. So when the SMS comes in, first thing we do again is encrypt it and store it encrypted. So even you could say, can we give information away? No, we can't. And even if a hacker comes in and tries to get it, all they've got is encrypted blobs of data that we can't even get. And it's not like we've got keys there to be able to decrypt it. We make sure that all the private keys are kept on the devices. And so we can't decrypt the data that's being stored.
All right. Well, this sounds almost, I don't want to say too good to be true, because I understand a lot of technical aspects behind this that are protecting this stuff. But there are some weird things we're doing with this. For example, I know that when using virtual credit cards, sometimes if you actually buy something with a virtual credit card, let's say you buy it online, and you want to go to return it at the brick and mortar store and say, okay, if I give you the credit card you used to buy this, it's a virtual credit card. I can't give you the card.
Yeah, there's no physical implementation. Right. And so our approach to that is, so for a while there we were going to do physical cards, but it's actually pretty messy to generate physical cards, get it shipped out to people. It's not a real good process. So while we're actually focusing on something different, which is getting those virtual credit cards into things like Apple Pay and Google Pay, into those systems, because if you actually look at people's behaviour, and I'm a good example of that, I almost never pull out a credit card anymore. I almost always pay with like Apple Pay, like I'll just do it through that. So our approach to that, and this is what we're doing going forward, is to allow you to put your virtual card in there, and then when you go back to that store, you can go, well, I used Apple Pay and here's the credit card, right? So I wouldn't be surprised in time if those physical cards actually disappear, because there's no reason. If you think about Apple Pay, you could easily be going from your bank to Apple Pay and then you're just presenting that. There's no reason for you to have plastic cards. In fact, mine sort of sit at home and rarely I ever take my plastic cards out anymore. It's like you just don't need them. Yeah, so I think the world has shifted a little bit there.
Yeah, I think where I get that way. I think I've got an Apple Card, which is a really nifty little titanium card, which I never take with me, and it doesn't have a card number on it because they rotate the numbers. Yeah. It's actually pretty interesting. Okay. So we're running a little bit long, so let me a couple more quick questions, and I'll let you go. You seem convinced from things I've seen you say that we could encourage businesses to have a privacy by design approach, focusing on minimizing data collection and securing data to collect. You seem kind of optimistic that could be, but how do we sell businesses on this model? Because it really seems to be like surveillance capitalism is just so lucrative that most of these companies just can't seem to give that up.
Well, I think it is. It's a bit like a drug habit. Like they've got, they've got their first pieces of data for free, and then they've decided to collect more and more. There is a kind of an alternate viewpoint, and I think it's Semantic that labelled it something like black data. The other side of that equation is when these companies are collecting data, they're putting themselves at a high risk. So what you see is, you'll see that example like Marriott Hotels or Delta Airlines. As soon as one of those hacks happen, right, 5 million accounts being hacked, it has email address, credit cards, phone numbers, all those things. It is such a reputational damage for that site. So there is a counter argument to say that you should only store the minimal you need for the business, because any more is creating liabilities. We had a great example of a telco that got hacked, right? And they got 7 years worth of personal information, people doing KYCs to get mobile phones and things like that. And the obvious question is why were they keeping all that? They didn't need it. Like once they've done that KYC check like we do, like you've done that identity verification, you can throw it away. You don't need that data anymore. You've done that, right? And they said, the government mandated we kept it for 7 years, that data. And so it's a big liability to keep personal data. So there is a counterpoint to surveillance capitalism. It's, there's a drug to say, the more I know, the better, and I can sell that data and all that. But there is a real reputational damage, and that's why there is this term of dark data and bad data, because the more you keep, the higher you're at risk and the more reputational damage you can be under. And there's also privacy laws. If you think about GDPR says, it was all about right to be forgotten, which originally was about I could be dropped off search engines and things, but it turned into I can get my account deleted, right? And that's why you see all these services now for deleting accounts. So again, like the more information you got in disparate areas, the harder it is to be able to fulfill that sort of GDPR requirement. And you see California got a Privacy Act as well. So I think there is a counter argument now to say at one time, sure, it was good to get all that sugar, but over time, the sugar just makes you fatter or something. And so I think that it's the same with that. Like it's good to collect all that personal data, but the more you collect, the more risk your company's at of some sort of intrusion, it's just inevitable. I mean, for most companies, it's just inevitable. It's just a matter of time. Will it be next month? Will it be next year? most companies. And so if you go from the attitude that at some point I'm going to be, someone's going to be able to get in here, let's keep the minimal data I can so I'm minimizing my exposure.
I think the Gravy Analytics hack is just a perfect example of that. This company was so greedy about collecting as much information as possible and do it in some really shady ways, collecting a lot of information about a lot of different people. And then, if you collect it, they're going to come for you, and they did. And now it's,
that's right. It's like a honeypot for them. It's just a honeypot. It's like you're just making it so attractive. If you've got all this data, you're making it really attractive to people put big efforts to get in there and get it. So don't do that. Just don't do that. And as I said, if you look at, the Anonyme backend systems, it's all encrypted data. So I don't know, people have got in and tried to steal data, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. This, it's pretty hard to decrypt that stuff. And every user, in fact, every pseudo has got different encryption keys. So, it's just too much work. I'll go somewhere a lot easier than that. Yeah.
All right. So what are your final thoughts? Anything really big coming up for you guys? Any fun new features you guys are going to be rolling out in the future? What's your roadmap look like? And did you have any just other top privacy tips that you like to give to people?
Yeah, well, so there's a few thoughts there. So one thing that we want to do, as I said, we've been in decentralized identity for 5 years, right? And so one of the things we're looking at the moment is putting the decentralized identity wallet into MySudo, so that you can use that and maybe even compartmentalize it by pseudo. So you could have your government credentials in there, and maybe you've got credentials from Costco goes into your shopping pseudo. And so we're thinking about putting a wallet in there, but a very persona-based wallet into the MySudo app. The interesting thing about that is, if we do that, then outside of Apple and Google, which, obviously everybody with an Apple phone or a Google phone, has their own wallets, which they use for boarding passes and things, that will probably, if we put that wallet into MySudo and get it out with our users, we'll probably have a wallet in the hands of more users than anybody else. It will be... It's something that we're really considering at the moment. And because we're seeing this rise and people issuing credentials for all sorts of reasons, it's going to be more and more reason for you to have it and be able to have it handy with you. So we're thinking, let's make it easy for users and provide the wallet into MySudo. In general, in terms of your audience, actually, I want to give you kudos. You did this session. I just want to tell everyone, listen to your session from 25th of November with Carissa Veliz, The Privacy is Power. I thought that was excellent. I listened to it twice, and I thought that was excellent because I thought what it did is it laid the groundwork for this conversation. I mean, her groundwork is privacy, surveillance capitalism, all the things that are happening. And so our view is, let's just try to help people, try to help people in that dangerous environment to be more safe. So I really thought that was a great discussion. But again, for people, I think privacy is a journey, right? It will probably take someone, if they're going from no privacy to get to a state to where I am, it's probably a 2-year journey if you think about it. I've got to think about different things, password managers. I've got to think about VPN. I've got to think about something like MySudo for different personas. And so you do that over time and you build habits. It's like building muscle at a gym. You've got to build privacy habits. And so, after a while you get those privacy habits, you always got your VPN turned on. You're always using personas, right? You always go in and make sure you've got privacy settings on inside your phone and things like that. So it is a muscle that has to be developed. And I guess people people just need to work on it slowly, learn and get better and better at it, and then eventually get really good at it.
Absolutely agree. All right. That was fantastic, Paul. That was very insightful. Thanks for coming on the show. I very much appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. And it's been great talking with you.
Thanks again to Paul for coming on the show. That was a lot of fun. Hopefully you learned some interesting things there. This tool, MySudo, is very handy. I encourage you to give it a look. There are other ones like it that you could look at as well, certainly for different parts of that. Privacy.com is kind of great for virtual credit cards, simple login, and Apple and Firefox and some others have some email relays, though those do have some of the problems we talked about. But those are really good for spammy kind of things. And there are other services that will let you get phone numbers as well. The nice thing about MySudo is they do all of those things. So anyway, it was great talking to Paul and talking about decentralized ID. On Thursday, the patrons will get their bonus Q&A with Paul. We talk a little bit about his privacy journey and how he got to where he is, how privacy impacts security, for example, with things like identity theft. We'll talk a little bit about the American Privacy Rights Act and privacy legislation in the U.S. in general. And then we'll even get a little bit more technical and talk about this notion of self-sovereign identity. So the patrons will get that on Thursday as usual. We got a lot of shows coming up. I've got a ton of interviews in the works. I just interviewed Yael Grauer, who's amazing. She's done a lot of stuff in the realm of privacy. We'll talk all about that. That was a very fun interview. I can't wait for you to hear that one. I've got like 3 other interviews scheduled, and I must have 6 other ones that are in the process of being scheduled. So I've got a lot of great stuff coming up. So, hey, if you haven't already subscribed, now would be a good time to do that, and then you won't miss any of that goodness. All right, that's going to do it for this week. Take care, everybody. Stay safe out there. And until next week, as always, don't get caught with your drawbridge down.